What is the financial regulatory landscape around football and how can we help you to understand it? Stick around as we find out. In this video, we're going to look at the financial regulations across Europe, looking at how the rules have evolved, whether they create a level playing field across Europe, and what impact they've had over the time that they've been in place. We're also going to look at the impact of COVID-19 on those regulations. In the context of a potential independent regulator across English football, we thought that it'd be worthwhile to look at the regulatory landscape across both England and wider Europe. At present, financial regulations are going to be driven by jurisdiction, league, and knockout European competitions. First of all, football clubs take on a legal form of a limited company, either a public limited company or a private limited company. Public, such as Manchester United, listed on a stock exchange, and the large majority will be privately owned. That means that all football clubs across England at least will be subject to English law and the financial regulations that sit around it. The obligations around that include tax withholding obligations, financial reporting obligations to Companies House and HMRC, and regular submissions to their regulatory bodies. Those regulatory bodies are primarily going to be UEFA, the Premier League, or the English Football League. Each of those sets of rules or regulations are different, so it makes it quite difficult to interpret that landscape across the whole of Europe, because when you get into different jurisdictions, clubs will have to adhere to a different set of jurisdiction regulations as well as a different set of league regulations. If we take the EFL as a starting point, the rules that are defined there are written by the English Football League. They are different to that of the Premier League, which in broad terms allows clubs to make greater losses. That might seem counterintuitive, because Premier League clubs surely earn more money and therefore don't need to be able to make greater losses. So that already introduces some level of disparity there. But what the concern is in the English Football League is that owners will be unable to underwrite those losses and therefore they've been restricted. Whereas owners in the Premier League potentially have the ability to underwrite losses because they potentially have greater wealth. But as you get to the top of the Premier League and the top 5 slots there, you do compete for UEFA competitions. And if you get there on football merit, you have to apply for a license. That means you have to adhere to strict financial regulations. And if you're an English club competing in the Premier League on a week-by-week basis, when it comes to UEFA competitions, the financial restrictions around UEFA competitions are much more strict than that of the Premier League. Broadly speaking, over a 3-year period, clubs competing in the EFL can lose £39 million, clubs competing in the Premier League £105 million, and clubs competing in UEFA, subject to the transitional rules of financial sustainability regulations, can now lose up to €60 million in a 3-year monitoring period, potentially some more depending on whether they're in financial good health. So that means that the clubs at the top of the Premier League will have to adhere to those stricter regulations in comparison to those that sit below them. If we look at another league, for example, La Liga. La Liga has a strict break-even requirement, at least in the budget. So before the season starts, La Liga requires clubs to submit a budget that is break-even. And it has to be a realistic break-even budget. They know the revenue that you've generated previously, and if there's a significant change to that, they want justification as to why your revenue is going to increase dramatically. That then restricts the amount that the club can spend on players, and the club has to make adjustments accordingly. This primarily explains the Lionel Messi situation at Barcelona when he was forced to leave. First of all, we need to understand why these rules exist to begin with. The first argument is that the rules exist to sustain football clubs into the long term. The second one being that they create a level playing field across football. Now, we've already established that one set of rules, no matter how much they try, does not create parity across the whole of Europe. That's not necessarily UEFA's fault. UEFA cannot control or govern what different jurisdictions or leagues do when it comes to their own financial or football finance regulations. And as a result, we do have disparity between certain leagues and certain countries. But what impact did COVID-19 have on these regulations? Quite simply, they were relaxed. UEFA did not want anyone to fall foul of the regulations at a time of crisis. Neither did the Premier League. So UEFA added an addendum to the financial fair play regulations as they were at the time to allow certain reliefs or certain amounts to be added back when it came to a break-even submission. Similarly, the Premier League did exactly the same. But the Premier League's scope for COVID-related adjustments was far greater than that of UEFA's, again creating a difference between the way that different clubs are being treated. But what other impacts do the regulations have, and how could it possibly be different in a landscape of an independent regulator in English football? Firstly, it's created a reliance on shareholders. Now, as long as clubs can pass between wealthy shareholders, that's not necessarily an issue. But if we want to promote the sustainability of football for the long term, you need to break the link between shareholder and legal entity. Most businesses will not continue to run if they're continually funded through equity or by other means from their shareholder. The shareholder will simply cut off the entity. The business will no longer continue. And this is the risk with football clubs, with a set of financial regulations that promotes losses to be made or cash losses to be made, with those losses being underwritten by the shareholder. It's great for the historical view, but doesn't look great for the future if that shareholder were to walk away, leaving the club stranded with potential debts that it can't manage, not necessarily financial debts in the form of loans, but contingent liabilities or performance-related loans or obligations from a player's perspective that can't be met without the cash from the shareholder. When we look at the level of financial debt across football since the rules have been introduced, they have reduced, which is seen to be a good thing. But is it a good thing? Most people would probably say yes. But what debt can do to any entity is to introduce a level of tension. And it's a level of independent tension or scrutiny that comes across the finances of the club. So I'd question whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. If the shareholder is looking to walk away, or if the shareholder is a bad egg, for want of a better term, then independent scrutiny on that shareholder and on the club's finances could be a good thing. When it comes to looking at the disparity of rules across Europe and looking at the Premier League in particular, it's quite clear that the Premier League rules allow clubs to invest significantly more, assuming again that they've got the cash to back up that spend. The Premier League continues to invest more than all the leagues combined across Europe. Some clubs in the Premier League are able to spend more than the combined top European leagues across the remainder of Europe. So this certainly doesn't create this level playing field. So what does the future hold for regulation when it comes to football finance? In England, it looks like there could be an independent regulator. And what would that mean for the Premier League and for the EFL? Presently, the Premier League and the EFL will govern their own financial related matters. That will mean all football reporting and the administration of any breaches around those regulations. If that power were to be removed from the EFL or the Premier League, that could have a significant impact on the commercial viability of either league. If we look at the Premier League in particular, it has to be recognised that the league has performed extremely well commercially. Broadcasting rights have continued to grow, and since the formation of the Premier League, the broadcasting rights have outperformed the rest of the market, showing interest on a global scale for a competitive product, both domestically and with clubs that are allowed to be formed that can compete across Europe. As we've just discussed, if the government step in and restrict those rules, let's say for example as they do in La Liga, although it's not necessarily a government-driven project, that would restrict the competitive advantage which currently sits within the Premier League. And would that be good for football? Because it would allow other clubs across Europe to potentially compete financially with those of the Premier League when it comes to the regulations, but it could have a non-intended consequence of reducing the commercial viability of the Premier League and therefore reducing the amount coming into the UK economy and subsequently the amount of tax collected by the UK government. This could have a significant impact. Presently, financial fair play cases are not necessarily caused by Premier League clubs. There are obviously some exceptions to that, but it does depend on how you define financial issues. But if there is a blanket approach to Premier League and EFL independent regulation, then this could potentially have a significant impact on English football's greatest export. Is that what independent regulation is there for? Again, we come back to the debate about sustainability of football clubs versus creating a level playing field. And it's always a balancing act between the two, no matter where we're talking about or what set of regulations we're talking about. And sometimes you can't have one without the other. What are your thoughts on the regulatory landscape in football? Leave your comments below. My name is Neil Wood and I'm a football finance professional. If you like the video, hit like and subscribe for more.